ghost story is from Kathleen Lee from Canada. Here's what Kathy says. When I was last at Hever Castle with, that's actually me, Claire, on the Executed Queens tour, I had a strange experience. I was staying in one of the upstairs rooms at Hever in the Astor Wing. It was our last morning there. I woke up and was lazing about in bed, thinking I really should get up. Then my door creaked open, all by itself. I was a little alarmed. I called out, "Hello," but there was no answer. I got out of bed trepidatiously and peered around the open door. There was no one there. I must admit, if someone had just been standing there, not answering my call, that would have scared the living daylights out of me. Now, I admit I was a bit in my cups the night before, and it's likely I forgot to lock my door, but I certainly didn't forget to close it. And why did it wait until I was awake the next morning to open in such an eerie manner? I decided I was being visited, and that the visit was a friendly one. Given the location, the logical conclusion was not the ghost of Anne Boleyn, but instead it was one of the Astors bidding me adieu from the beautiful home they'd so lovingly restored. I took great comfort in that, and it was the perfect end to a perfect trip. Thank you for that, Kathy. And by the way, I just want to congratulate Kathy on her debut novel, Whiteout. Do look up Kathleen Lee and Whiteout on Amazon. Our second ghost story is from Daphne. Daphne explains, "I don't have a specifically Tudor story, but I do have a true one. It happened in a rectory, on land possibly on the route Roman soldiers and slaves walked to and from nearby lead mines. It was my aunt who experienced it. I have since made brief contact with the very kind present owners, who confirmed that in the 6 years they've been there, nothing supernatural has occurred, but that when intended renovations have taken place, they will get the house blessed, just in case. I am aged 74, and my maternal aunt Dora, who had this experience, was my godmother, a much loved, honest, highly intelligent lady who died in 1997 of ovarian cancer, aged 84. And Daphne's actually sent this photo of her aunt. The tale was to become a legend within our family and was kept from me until I was 15, as I had a nervous, anxious disposition. And my mother, Dora's elder sister, didn't want to scare me witless. I wrote out the account in the third person freehand while my aunt described in her own words what had happened, so that I could document her description in a readable but unexaggerated way, without the repetitiveness of an elderly lady speaking. While it may sound to some as fiction, it certainly wasn't regarded as such by Dora or our family. So please forgive if my writing style makes it seem like that. Every description, every detail was part of what she said. I was then in my 50s, a year or so before she died. Here is what I wrote down. The bedroom was full of the noise of wheels turning and chains being dragged. It was pitch dark, but I had the sensation that the furniture was moving around and that the foot of the bed was swaying from side to side. My Aunt Dora, then at the age of 82, paused, unsettled and distressed, as she recalled the supernatural experience which had happened to her when she was a young woman. The horror had never left her, and she shuddered even after the passing of so many decades. In the family house at Epsom, back in the mellow days of the summer of 1938, Dora had happily prepared her suitcase for her annual holiday. It wasn't a holiday in the true sense of the word, because she was to accompany her employer, Miss Ellis, and 6 young children in Miss Ellis's care. But it was all the break Dora was able to afford. These annual trips were always enjoyable. Dora loved the English countryside and liked Miss Ellis's company. Dora was then 27, small and slim with a mass of coal-black hair and big dark eyes set in an olive skin. The seventh child of a family of 9, 5 boys followed by 4 girls. The family were very close, especially the sisters, who were all each other's best friends. She had no boyfriend at the time and did not foresee meeting anyone and having children of her own, with the prospect of war on the horizon as Germany started to make threatening noises. So the idea of helping with the children on the holiday appealed to her. Miss Ellis used to take different groups of children away annually to Trevone in Cornwall. The children's parents often had connections to the church and were in the army, so were abroad for much of the time. When the parents were unable to return to the UK for an annual holiday, Miss Ellis would take the children and stay at rectories lent by the church. This year, for the first time, it wasn't going to be Cornwall, but the small village of Teffont, near Salisbury, in Wiltshire. Dora lifted her case downstairs with a struggle and hugged her 3 sisters goodbye. She was to be away for 3 weeks, so would write to each other and keep up to date with all the news. Miss Ellis was waiting at Epsom Station with the children. The youngest Bobby was 4 and the others were various ages, upwards to 10. They'd tried to travel light, even though their stay was to be 3 weeks. Bringing the 3 small Cavalier King Charles Spaniels had been Miss Ellis's idea, as they belonged to the parents of one of the children. But the dogs were calm and friendly and slept most of the journey. Dora's happy personality and kind nature always made her a friend to the children on these occasions. She was strict and set a high standard of behaviour, but was free with praise when the children were generous or well-mannered. Children knew where they were with her. She would give them a lot of time, reading and playing with them and encouraging them to learn. The train journey was made more interesting by her pointing out things en route and explaining about the countryside. A bus ride followed the train journey, and years later Dora recalled the loveliness of the narrow lanes and the honeysuckle in the hedgerows as the bus slowly made its way towards Teffont, the trees growing over the road and brushing over the roof of the bus. At last the bus arrived in the tiny village, and gathering together their possessions, they all piled off, the children chattering excitedly, and took stock of their surroundings. "This way," announced Miss Ellis with the authority of age and experience, and led her little group along the side of the road, while Dora struggled with the leads of the 3 little dogs in one hand and her case in the other. They approached the driveway to an imposing, almost forbidding house, set well back from the road and with lawns sweeping up to the front door. The building was ancient, but had been near the site of the old Roman roadway from the lead mines which led off to Salisbury. Along this route the slaves would have been driven. By this means the Roman foot and horse soldiers would have passed. The little party proceeded up the driveway, carrying their cases and dragging their dogs. The children held each other's hands and Dora brought up the rear, chivying the stragglers. They hesitated before the large imposing door, before Dora bashed it hard with the door knocker. It swung open to reveal the small figure of a maid, who looked from the children to Miss Ellis and back to Dora with some nervousness. "I hadn't been told there were so many of you," she said accusingly. Miss Ellis swept in with the children scuttling behind and Dora and the dogs in the rear. The dogs were taken away to the kitchen, and the children, slightly subdued, were ushered up the stairs to their rooms by the maid and Miss Ellis, leaving Dora in the hall waiting alone. She noticed a trap door in the floor with a big iron ring attached to open it. The maid returned and hesitated before gabbling, "There's only 1 room left and we don't use it unless it's unavoidable, but there isn't anywhere else to put you." Again the hesitation. Dora followed the maid up the stairs and along a long passage to a room at the end. The maid showed Dora in, but hovered uncertainly in the doorway. "It's up to you," she said quietly, "but I wouldn't sleep in here, and I have to tell you, I won't make your bed or dust either." Dora, tired and irritated, plonked her bags down and nodded, wondering if the maid was slightly deranged. The next 2 weeks were spent idyllically fishing and walking in the garden and enjoying the lovely countryside. The weather was good, and the children and dogs spent all the daylight hours playing outside. Exhausted by the full day's activities, Dora slept each night like a log, not minding at all her slight isolation from the rest of the party by the long passageway between her room and theirs. She thought no more about the maid's odd attitude, other than to notice that, true to her word, the maid neither made the bed nor cleaned the room. Dora went to bed on the night that was to stay with her for the rest of her life and slept almost immediately. The room had only lamps and candles, so reading was difficult. All was silent in the house and outside in the courtyard. Then, in the early hours of the morning, Dora awoke with a start. All around her was the sound of metal wheels turning and chains dragging, as if strange vehicles were passing right by her bed. She felt pinned to the bed by a weight on her chest. The foot of the bed was moving from side to side and slightly elevated. Dora tried to move her arms, but they lay heavy and immobile at her sides. As her hand touched her leg, she felt it was icy cold. Finally, in slow motion, she managed to sit up and swing her legs out of the bed. She felt for the candle and match and took several goes to get the match to strike the tinder as the bed was swaying. As the light from the candle filled the room, the foot of the bed fell down with a crash, and the noise seemed to be pushed back by the arc of light until it finally ceased. Dora's first thought was, what on earth is going on? It must be war manoeuvres. Swiftly followed by, why is the door opening and what is going to come in? Will it be huge, towering over me, or small? Fear finally washed over her. The now open door revealed the small, terrified figure of little Bobby, the youngest child. Miss, he sobbed. Galvanised into movement by the child's distress, Dora clasped him to her. What is it, Bobby? She said in what she hoped was a comforting voice. I saw, said Bobby, heaving with fresh sobs. Dora felt her whole stomach leap and plunge and her legs turn to jelly and cut in quickly. You didn't see anything, dear. It was only a bad dream. Come on, let's go back to your room and I'll sit with you and light a little candle until you're asleep again. Hand in hand, the quaking pair inched their way along the passage, and Dora sat with the little boy for about half an hour until he drifted back to sleep. Some 50-odd years afterwards, I asked her whether she asked him later what he'd seen that night. No, she said. I think I'd have collapsed with fear and shook whatever he'd said, and if I met him now after all these years, I still would not want to know. Now she stood and felt her way along the wall of the dark passageway back towards her room. Her attention was drawn to a light coming from under the maid's door, and without knocking, she impetuously threw the door open, saying, "What is going on?" before registering the scene before her. The maid was sitting up in bed crying, and with rows of candles set all around the room on every surface. "I told you not to sleep in there," she cried. "It happens to everyone who sleeps there." "Nonsense," croaked Dora, slamming the door shut as fast as she'd opened it. Back in her own room again, a scene of devastation faced her. The enormous heavy wardrobe was now a good 3 feet out from the wall. The massive oak chest of drawers had discarded its drawers and contents onto the floor. Her bed was skewed at an angle. Dora tried to push it back in place, but was unable to shift it. She tentatively climbed onto it and lay there cold and frightened, praying for daylight. When it finally came, down in the courtyard, all the chickens which had happily pecked their way to and fro each day were lying dead and strewn about. She hastily got washed and dressed and slowly went downstairs, feeling sick and shaky. In the kitchen, Miss Ellis stood upright and pale. The children were eating breakfast in the next room, but the door had been shut between so that they couldn't see the vet leaving with the bodies of the 3 little dogs. Miss Ellis took Dora by the arm. "We had to get the vet in this morning early," she said. 2 of the dogs were dead when we came down for breakfast, and the 3rd was in a corner snarling and wouldn't let us approach him. The vet put him down and said the other 2 had died of some sort of shock or heart failure. Dora sank into a chair and blurted out the events of the night. Miss Ellis decided on the spot they would leave for home that afternoon and asked the maid, now silent and taciturn, to make the arrangements. On the way home, Dora began to write an account for her sisters telling what had happened. By the time she'd finished it that evening, it ran to some 27 pages. At the age of 82, when she was asked by me if I could write the experience down, she could only make just 2 pages. This seems to me to show that her account had been truthful, as there'd been no attempt to exaggerate and embroider it over the years. Indeed, much had been played down. In any event, her honesty and open character would not have allowed for lies, and I believe that she'd described truthfully what she'd heard and seen that night. Even as an old lady, Dora had no wish for it to be supernatural. She wanted there to be a reason and a scientific explanation, and still tried approaching it from various angles to account for what had happened. Despite her efforts, the spine-tingling tale of her curtailed holiday still made her perplexed and unnerved, even after all those years. What a scary story to leave you on. I'm so sorry to leave you on that. I do hope you can get some sleep tonight. Sleep peacefully and soundly, and take care. You can subscribe to this channel by clicking around about there. You can hit the bell to be notified as these videos go live. And you can give me a like and leave me a comment. But please, please, please sleep peacefully. Hope to see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.